Namaste all, and welcome to Evenings with Sraddhalu. Namaste, Sraddhalu.
Namaste, Narad, and welcome to all.
Today we have a very interesting topic, or I should say a few topics: food, fasting, and physical transformation, along, of course, with your questions. So I look forward especially to the physical transformation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Narad. We've been dwelling a bit on things around the Siddhis, and I thought it's useful to take a brief diversion. It's not unconnected, it is part of the record of yoga. But the point of transition was another question which came from Jose. We had taken Jose's question last time, and he sent one more question. Thanks for addressing my previous questions live. Now a different topic around food and nourishment. So we'll see the question, and then we'll see something very important that Sri Aurobindo discusses regarding food and fasting in connection with physical transformation, and this is as part of the record of yoga. So we'll come to the full context of Sri Aurobindo's comments, but we'll use Jose's question as an entry point to enter that topic. Jose asks, during my last 10 years, as I turned 40, I was conscious of the metabolic changes happening and the impact of different types of food. My main object was to biohack and optimize the system. Found quickly that the best and fastest feedback to sort out the preferred nourishment was becoming conscious of food types and impact in mental clarity, memory, alertness, overall energy, and also my spiritual aspiration and concentration level as a priority. I recognized that sugar was very detrimental in my teens and avoided it. In my 40s, I realized that the simple carbs would numb my mind and body and started avoiding them along with processed and refined products, seed oils. This by itself solved many issues for me. I'm reading in detail because some of it will be useful for all of us. Fast forward to today. He'll describe my diet that is unorthodox from a spiritual standpoint, but personally has been slowly formulating itself from my inside out. And when I don't cheat, I feel my bodies are more receptive and open to the mother's Shakti, and intuition permeates easily. Also, the physical body feels happier and is enduring time well. My food intake has been reduced in quantity a lot, but the small amount I eat is highly nutrient rich. Only eat once or twice a day. My food intake is basically animal-based with some fruits and veggies occasionally. Meats, animal fats, butter, milk, cheese, eggs are 90% of my diet. I think it's what they call carnivore or some such diet. Now, I really wish I could do without food and animal products, but based on my biofeedback and my intuition, this is what is working best for my spiritual development. So now his questions first. What is your take on this apparently contradictory experience around physical nourishment, animal products, and the integral yoga? Second, do you foresee a potential future development where we will be able to maintain a more optimized physical vehicle for the yoga without having to eat dense matter? 3, how your personal diet has evolved in your path. And 4, any discoveries from your part in your journey that hint future possibilities. So this could be a general discussion in itself, but particularly when it comes to this question of the yoga, then we have very interesting observations from the mother and from Sri Aurobindo around this. And naturally, if you're going to speak of food, you also need to speak of fasting because you want to reduce the quantity of dense matter in Jose's question, and so on. So I'm using his question as a starting point. We will read what Sri Aurobindo had to say about food in relation to physical transformation. So this is way beyond Jose's question. But understanding that big picture, we will be able to come back to this Jose's question as well as generalize to other guidelines around food, fasting, etc. in relation to the spiritual life, and particularly because this concerns the biology with the physical transformation also. So obviously, Sri Aurobindo and the mother both had very strong statements regarding fasting itself. And we'll look at that also later. But for now, we start with a text of Sri Aurobindo. This is dated January 1927. Now remember, record of yoga largely completes around 1914-15 because he has already reached the supramental consciousness. And of course, there are ranges. There is a point beyond which to note down details become almost irrelevant. You do not even have words and vocabulary, or when he does mention things regarding certain gradations of the supermind, it wouldn't make too much sense for us in any case. But all that he has documented from his experience in the life divine and in the synthesis of yoga in terms of what is required for the purpose of sadhana. But this is 1927, where already the full focus has shifted to the action of the supramental consciousness, having transformed the mind already and the vital, is working on the physical consciousness and the physical body itself. And here, there's a cryptic comments. We're going to look at these and then also look at other texts to complete the picture. He starts with this. 4 mistakes, dash, and then he lists the 4 mistakes. 1. Began on a mistaken or merely theoretic knowledge about absorption from outside. So absorption of food from outside. And there's some mistaken or merely theoretical knowledge. That was his starting point. That was a mistake. 2nd, giving up of food is not the condition for finding the secret of physical transformation, obviously. It is the result of finding the secret. So it would be an error to give up food and say, by this, I'm going to change the physical consciousness or transform the body. Rather, as a consequence of transformation, there would be this freedom from need for food. 3rd, cessation of hunger, feeling fed, refusal of food by the body is not a sign. It proceeds from the body vital, not from the body substance. So we make a distinction of the body substance and what it requires, the body vital and what it pushes towards, and even something body mental, which he's not referring to here. But make these distinctions, and then you will understand what needs to be done. 4th, again, these are mistakes, remember. The entire secret can be found and made effective only when the body is brought into the right condition. A process of adaptation is necessary. The entire secret. So he has obviously got much of the secret, but there's something which is the entire. Can be found. You might find the mistake, but how? You might find the secret, but how do you apply it? So can be found and made effective. You might find the secret and say, oh yes, but until you make effective, the secret is as good as nothing. So making effective requires the body to be brought into the right condition. And this right condition of the body consciousness in relation to the supermind or the general spiritual evolution. A process of adaptation is necessary because your body has adapted to something inferior and it has to adapt to something superior. But the adaptation here is a very important idea. And then he puts item 5. Remember, he said 4 mistakes, but now 5 item is a comment he's making. Transition. Continuity of consciousness, continuity of energy, continuity of ananda, continuity of substance. Now, this is an example of how he makes cryptic notes to himself, which we can guess. And if you're kind of tuned into the context, you get an idea of what he's saying. Here, remember he said process of adaptation is needed, and he's describing now the transition from this state of living in the body consciousness and substance to that in which the transformation, supramental transformation takes place. This transition requires or implies continuity of consciousness that has to be developed, continuity of energy, continuity of ananda, and continuity of substance. More, we will not speculate, but he's describing something which has to be built as if a transitional bridge. Then he writes, body substance sacred, earth herself sacred implied, to be mastered, adapted, and transformed, not forced and martyrized. So you see, he's even dropping verbs, body substance sacred. He's not even writing body substance is sacred. At this point, his notes have become more and more minimal, cryptic, 1927, mostly there for himself. He knows it's well beyond even the reach of others who are reading, but you get an idea. In this transition, a key element is the recognition that the body substance is sacred. Now, this is not something new. This is not something big for Sri Aurobindo. Way back, already before 1911, 12, 13, as part of the sadhana, he has this experience of the entire material world and matter itself as an expression of Sachidananda. So, what's the big deal? Why is he highlighting this? So, there's obviously something much more that he's now pointing to, that the substance of it has a sanctity of a grade well beyond that, different from matter generally. So you could have an experience, and this is not such a big deal. One can have this in certain other paths also, which aim to perceive the divine everywhere. And you will say everything in the world, down to all material substance, which includes your body and the table next to you and the chair and the earth and the trees, are all as if substance of Sachidananda or form of Sachidananda formulated in a particular way. It's not this he's referring to. This is a beautiful experience. It is a wonderful, great experience, but he's going to something far greater. While seeing this, he's making a very clear distinction between matter as it is, earth herself is sacred, but body substance is sacred. And there's a distinction between seeing Sachidananda or the divine presence everywhere and the sanctity of what this body means or what it represents. Now, this experience we would have when we met the mother or Sri Aurobindo physically or touched them. You looked at his body and you felt this was something unearthly, something as if transplanted from heaven. Substantially, one could feel that. You touched that. Narad, if you're online, would you like to share your contact with the mother, the physical touch of her body? If you feel like sharing this.
Yeah, there were quite a few things, of course. The first was the touch of a wideness that you can't even speak about. When I would enter her room, there were no walls. No walls at all. And yet it took me, it seemed like a couple of minutes to walk to her chair. And yet it takes 2 seconds. The most important thing, I believe, was when the mother asked me, would you like to talk or would you like to meditate? And I told her, meditate, mother, knowing nothing at all about meditation at that age. And suddenly I felt the fire in the lower abdomen. And that fire started to increase in intensity until I was totally engulfed in it. And then it rose above my head and it kept rising and rising. But there was no burning. There was great warmth, no doubt, but there was no burning. And when it finished, I mean, I was finished. I just fell down at her feet and I wept on her feet. And she smiled at me and she said, you have just begun. There were other moments when I took flowers to her that was so extraordinary. She would look at a flower in the way that no one else I've ever met could look. So deeply she went into that flower, which is what I try to do now when I talk to them. And it was so wonderful for me to see that. It was such an experience. But about music, one of the first things Mother asked me, of course, Mother knows everything. She said, "Is the music with you now?" And I said, "Oh, yes, Mother, it's always with me." And Mother looked at me and smiled and said, "Not always." And she took it away for quite some years to work on other aspects of the being.
Can you describe when she touched you or you touched her hand, the nature of that contact of her body?
When I put my head in her lap and her hands touched my head, I can't say, I can't speak about those things. They're, they're so powerful, so profound, so beautiful. I'm there right with her now.
From the moment you began to describe this, we could feel the shift and we could feel that what you experienced coming through. It's so precious. Thank you. It's a good example of what we were discussing the last couple of times of transmission of an experience. As you saw, as Narad was entering the memory of that contact, the full force of that living experience was, as it was forming in him, we felt the transmission of it and that state, something of that, whatever we are able to catch in this association, in the contact through the Vyapti. And although he said he could not articulate in words, the thing itself could be felt. Something of it that came through. The body substance sacred. And it is like that already in Sri Aurobindo's physical tissue, in the mother's physical tissue, that the substance itself is so suffused with the divine consciousness, with the supramental consciousness, that it is as if the body has become substantially or substance of the divine in its revealed overt sense. This distinction is very important because otherwise people will confuse this description and say, ah, yes, but it's seeing divine everywhere. Also, all matter is divine. It's Sachidananda. No, it's not that. It's something much more than that, what she's describing here. And we felt that with that touch with the mother's physical body.
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Sri Aurobindo
Yes.
and my first experience with him, because it's today exactly as it was then in 1965. And he was seated on a couch, and he motioned me to come forward and sit with him. I couldn't believe it. And he sat very close to me, and he put out his hand and touched me, my heart, up chest. And I will never forget this in all the lives that are to come, when the strands of his hair touched my body. It was an experience that I've never had before, never had again. But I have it always. I can recall it more than recall it. I can live it again and again. That touch of my Lord on my body. And I could feel the hairs from his beard. I better let you get back to your talk. You know, he came the next day also. And it was, for me, so extraordinary because he was walking with two people. One of them had already passed away, that was Purani, and the other was Nolini on either side of him. And I was so angry, so angry. And he said to me, "What a look." Of course, it didn't stir him at all. And I said to him, "Did you or did you not come to me last night?" And he said, "What kind of a question is that?" It was, and I said, "I need to know," something like that. And very quietly he said, "I did." So I wrote to Mother through Pavitra, and Mother said the experience was genuine. So she let me know that it was genuine, and Pavitra said, "Keep it quietly, more experiences will come." So, I've disturbed your talk, please.
Not at all. It's perfect for what we were discussing. Thank you, Narad. It's so precious. I'm so grateful that you shared it. You can feel in the way he described it, because he was living it, you felt the contact. And that is one of those examples where a physical contact takes place with Sri Aurobindo or the mother while they have still left the physical body. So it is in the subtle physical that this happens. And the subtle physical, you must understand, is physical. That's why it's called subtle physical. It is physical. In the physical domain, there are finer gradations which are subtle to our coarsest, grossest physical, but they're still physical. And it is in that domain that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have taken station for the work that is being done. And it was on this level that this contact Narad had. So that even the contact which he felt physically was a physical contact in the subtle physical realm. So the body substance sacred, earth herself, to be mastered, adapted, and transformed, not forced and martyrized. You see, in a lot of the approaches in the past, matter was dealt with as a substance to be manipulated, modified, shaped, compelled by force. Or, in the contrary, in the ascetic tradition, martyrized. You beat it down, you break it, destroy it to get free of it. Neither of these. It has to be mastered. Now, mastery of matter means you can wield it to do whatever the consciousness chooses, but that's not enough. Adapted. So, having mastered it for what it already is, it must be adapted to a higher operation to become an instrument of the supramental consciousness, and then transformed by that higher consciousness. So, mastered, adapted, and transformed. We would have normally said, oh, having mastered it, that's it, you've reached. No, there is something, a potential in matter, which is beyond what its capacity is even after you've mastered it. And there is an adaptation process, and which will lead eventually to the material substance itself being transformed and divinized in the physical body. And now you review the lines before: continuity of consciousness, continuity of energy, continuity of ananda, continuity of substance. This is the passage from what it is after it has been mastered through the adaptation and transformation. So you are getting here a glimpse of a very high grade of operation that Sri Aurobindo is describing, is working on, and which is way beyond anything that currently we are able to conceive. So the body has to be brought into the right condition through this process, and a process of adaptation is necessary. So keep in mind that all the text that he further has is belonging to this mode of working, although the principle would apply in the current biology, body, physical matter that we might deal with. We can even speak of adaptation here, but what he's speaking of adaptation is of a different order. So now we come to the next part of the same text. Here he has put the term athanatogen. If you look up this word athanatogen, it does not exist in current English vocabulary. But if you look at the roots, then you find this insight. The Greek word athanatos, immortality, gen, production. So process or production of immortality, or immortalizing the physical consciousness, transforming it in a way that leads it to become, to overcome death and immune to death. So this is what Sri Aurobindo is now describing. Okay, now, again, do not reduce it to ordinary terms, but understand that it's operating on that higher level. Athanatogen. And then number 1, pranayama. 2, gland processes. 3, absorption from outside. 4, light process. 5, physical support, transformation of ordinary food, body power of living, or etheric assimilation. So 5 points he puts, which seem to be an elaboration of this term athanatogen, or the means of this athanatogen. So we don't know what he means because he has just put a single word, pranayam. What is it that he's referring to, pranayam? We don't know. So it's better not to speculate in these things because, as I said, it's not this grade of operation, it is that grade of operation. Remember, Sri Aurobindo has already done pranayam at a very early stage before his yoga. He has seen the benefits. Subsequent to the yoga, he has gone way beyond what pranayam could give by any means. So what he's referring to is something else. But understand the term itself in its essence would mean mastering prana. Ayama, mastery of prana, life force, in the grade of the body consciousness. Then it might make a different sense. Second, gland processes. So there are certain changes taking place in the working of the glands. Here again, if you look back at Sri Aurobindo's comment, which is from his Tales of Prison Life, there's a very interesting example there where he speaks of how his hair had begun to shine. And he said that his other colleagues in the jail were surprised, and they asked him, how is it that your hair is shining? Because are they giving you special food? Because they were all on a special diet. Jail diet is one of the worst. And normally with that diet, your body begins to wilt and becomes weak. So how is it that Sri Aurobindo alone seems to have hair which is as if oiled? So they say, have they given you oil? Are they giving you separate food? And he says, no, it's not that. It is as a result of the yoga, there is a working in the cellular consciousness, which has changed, and the body is able to produce the necessary oils to keep the hair shiny. So you already see here a shift in the glandular processes of the biology that has taken place in 1908. So what he's speaking of now again is something which goes way beyond, not of that level, but recognizing that there is a shift in the glandular process itself by the operation of the higher consciousness. Point 3 is absorption from outside, the food that's taken in, absorbed by the body. It's just a bullet point. What it means, what needs to be done, he has not elaborated. 4th is light process. Again, we don't know what that means, but it has to do something with the effect of light itself, or a means of connecting through light. And 5th is the physical support. So here we may be able to comment a little more. So physical support, transformation of ordinary food, body power of living or etheric assimilation. So he has earlier commented, and this is also part of the record of yoga when he does this experiment, where he goes on a long fast. He continued the fast for 23 days, if I remember right. And every day he would lift a bucket full of water with his arm like this, one arm, to check whether the arm was strong enough or whether there was weakness. It's a very objective assessment he's lifting up every day. And he says at the end of it, it's not as if he had become weaker, he had actually become stronger. All he took was water, nothing else. So despite the physical fasting, there was no reduction in strength, energy, but he comments that the body had begun to lose mass. And he could not find the secret of replacing the lost mass at that point when he did this experiment. So of course, this is in the early stages of his sadhana. So here's this point we can understand: the physical support, transformation of ordinary food, body power of living, or etheric assimilation. So something has to be done by physical support by which the biology gets the external absorption of material, if that is required, or some other means of absorption of material that is required. So this is an example of very cryptic comments. There's nothing you can say if you have not come to that stage and understood what his references are. But we get some glimpses, that's all we can say. He now continues with the text. Okay, before we continue. So first he's saying ordinary food itself, if it has to be assimilated into a biology which is of a different grade altogether, which has become superconscious, the material coming in needs to undergo some kind of transmutation to the grade of superconsciousness of that. I'll give an example here. Often we understand things of a higher nature by an analogy on a lower nature, but you must understand analogy is not identity. So what do we do now? Our consciousness, let's say our physical body, after whatever quality of food, nourishment you have lived with, and with the work of exercise you do to make it more conscious. You're infusing consciousness into physical tissue. You now take food which is extremely crude, coarse, heavy, full of inertia. Now, there are two kinds of inertia. One is in the material itself. You might take something which is very cheesy, very high carbs, etc. The other is the person who has cooked is full of inertia, and it's full of those inertia vibes. These are two things by which that inertia would come in. You eat that food, you can feel the dulling, numbing effect, and you find your biology energy is dropping. You get sleepy, and you feel the inertia catch up with you. Why? Because a whole mass of material, which is not of the refinement of your current physical tissue, has come in, is being absorbed, and pulls down your physical consciousness to its level. Until gradually your higher grade material asserts itself on the lower grade material and starts, so to say, infusing into it and lifting it. So with that dullness of inertia, you go to sleep, you wake up, you feel a little better, maybe 2 or 3 days down, the overall material has come up to the grade, and the body, which was more conscious than the food that you took in, has lifted that substance to its own grade. You get an idea here of what it means to, if you take ordinary food in, it needs to undergo this step. So physical support, transformation of ordinary food, body power of living, or etheric assimilation. So if you want to bypass this, instead of taking this very low grade substance, you absorb higher grade material of the physical substance, of the subtle physical domains, and absorb it directly in the grade that you need. That's the suggestion here, body power of living or etheric assimilation. Either you continue with your own substance or you absorb by an etheric means. And these are things he's, let's say, working on. He's experimenting with, exploring, we might say, as part of the work that he's doing on the physical transformation. So we continue now. A very important comment he makes. The attempt to transform the body through the renunciation of food has not succeeded as was expected or in the time given, and for the following reasons. So he's actually attempted this. You give up food, draw off material by other means, whatever he has described earlier. Something has not worked there. This is one of those very rare cases where in the record of yoga, you find something has not worked. If you go back to all the earlier steps of the yoga, yes, there are progresses, sometimes there are minor relapses, but very rapidly something is attained and he moves on and on and on, building rapidly. Here is the challenge now where the supramental consciousness has been brought down all the way to the physical consciousness, and a means has to be found by which this working of the supermind on the physical tissue of the body will transform the tissue and divinize it. This is the work he's at. So the attempt to transform the body through the renunciation of food. So you avoid this whole business of taking lower grade substance and having to transmute it each time. So you give up the food itself and find other means, absorption by etheric assimilation or others, or the light process is very suggestive, maybe drawing directly through light, but has not succeeded as was expected or in the time given. So he's so careful in his notings. So the outcome has not come the way he expected, and it has not happened in the time given. Maybe in principle, if he continued 10 years, who knows? But it's not happened within the time given. And for the following reasons. Now he lists the reasons, which are in all 4. First, the knowledge or idea with which it was begun was imperfect and not applicable under the present circumstances. In reality, what was chiefly relied upon was a great dynamic energy and the power of the will and aspiration to bring the divine realization into the body. These forces can do miracles under the right conditions, and now they are quite strong enough to produce miraculous results on the subjective plane. In the physical consciousness, the physical mind, and the vital physical. But the most material is not yet ready. So this is one of the few places where he's telling you the power he has attained already of acting from the higher spiritual force on material circumstances. So these forces, which are great dynamic energy, power of the will, and aspiration to bring the divine realization into anything. Okay? This is already within, very strong, and strong enough to produce miraculous results on the subjective plane, that is in the mind and vital. Then in the physical consciousness, he's able to intervene. In the physical mind, now he's looking at gradations. In the physical mind, that is the part of the physical consciousness which turns to mind. The vital physical is the part of the physical consciousness that turns to life force. But the most material is not yet ready. The physical, the most material gross part of the physical is not yet ready. And on that, he is unable to do that grade of miraculous intervention. So the attempt was therefore premature. Meaning if he worked upon it a little more, at some stage it might get ready. But at this point, it's not. In order that it should succeed, one of two things was necessary. Either a right entire knowledge and process, some critical element of the knowledge, or else the divine grace, supporting a complete descent of the highest supramental truth and a complete ascent to meet it of the supramental from below. So supramental truth comes down. From below, the hidden supermind in matter opens and rises, and the two link, and the divine grace has to support this. So either this or the right entire knowledge and process. One of these is required. If you remember the little booklet, The Mother, where he says there are two things which are required for the great and difficult task, and that is the descent of the higher, the grace from above and the response from below. And then it is only the highest supermind working from above and opening from below which can accomplish this task. You see that in that little booklet? It's exactly this which he's referring to. These things should have been got first and firmly founded. For till then, there can be no effective divinization of the material body. So you can have divinization, partial, unstable perhaps, but the effective will require these things to be got and firmly founded. So they were not sufficiently firmly founded at that point. Remember, this is 1927, when already that work of the overmental gods being linked to the disciples was being done by the mother parallelly, while this action is taking place in the physical, for the physical transformation. So again, if we had to interpret this in terms of the transformation, the physical mind, or rather the mental physical, he could access and transform. The vital physical, he could access and transform. It's only this grade which he could not transform, though he could access. So following reasons why this did not work, this was the first reason. The second reason he gives, the entire giving up of food cannot be the condition of the realization. It must be, if it is to be done, one result or circumstance of the realization. So you cannot say by giving up food, this will be made possible. It is when this is made possible as a transformation, then one of the result or circumstances would be that you won't need to take food. You may still take, but you won't need to. Third, it is a mistake to think that cessation of hunger, a sensation of being fed, feeling full, or the refusal of food by the body is a sign that the material frame is ready for living without sustenance. So here's a very important guideline, not only on that level, but it applies to us on this level. So you don't feel hungry, your hunger is gone, you feel full, or the body says, I don't need, I don't want, and it rejects. It doesn't mean that it's actually ready to live without the food. So be clear whenever you have these things, you say, all right, I need to work around it because the body still needs it. So don't fall into that error. But then he explains, hunger and the rest come from the vital in the body. The most material physical has a different thing. The hunger is coming from there. You could tell the vital and get it to be satiated and you will not feel hungry. But the most material will still need the food or material substance. It was this bodily vital which was ready and desirous of abstaining from food. But the most material parts were not ready. But being without a voice and accustomed to obey and act only as an instrument, they gave no sign except the fading of the flesh and physical weakness. So we are speaking of actually three different grades in the biology, but the last two of these. The vital physical was ready and said, okay, I'm ready for this. I don't need food. But the physical, he says, being without voice, it does not speak up. It does not assert itself. And it is accustomed to obey and act only as an instrument. That gave no sign that it's not ready. And the only sign it gave was the flesh begins to fade and there's some physical weakness. To understand this distinction in the working and where they were at in terms of physical transformation. Now, this material part is most important and indispensable. It is the earth herself in the concrete. So you're hitting the grade of tissue, which is the most material part. And it's literally earth substance there. It is earth herself in the concrete. It is part of the crude stuff you have to use for building the divine physical substance, and you cannot do without it. Therefore, it must be respected and not forced before it is ready. It has to be mastered and transformed, but not done violence to or neglected. So this was point number 3. And point number 4, the entire secret for which you are seeking can only be found and applied effectively when the material body is ready, and for that a process of adaptation is indispensable. The final secret, even if you find it, must remain only a theory until this adaptation is made. What you need to find out first is a secret of the transition. For you are physically in a period of transition. The period of victorious realization comes later. So now you see in this wording, you get a hint. This is as if guidance being given to him from the divine, from the master of the yoga, addressing Sri Aurobindo's physical consciousness, you, the person. What you need to find is the secret of transition, for you are physically in a period of transition. Victorious realization comes later. So, you see, here is the elaboration of those cryptic words which he had put before. And now he's elaborating on those cryptic words. 4 physical things have to be attained: stability and continuity of consciousness, stability and continuity of energy, stability and continuity of ananda, stability and continuity of substance. The first, she has gained physical consciousness. That is stability and continuity of consciousness. It gives a certain mukti, liberation, conscious immortality, and can give great results, but not by itself the complete result aimed at. The second, that is stability and continuity of energy, is beginning to come. But as it brings you a step nearer to the completeness, it is itself also more dependent than the first on its instrument, the body. It can exist in itself, but for its completeness, it must become an entirely physical and material strength. So, stability and completeness of energy. The energy itself must become entirely physical and material strength, the densification of energy until it becomes practically material. For which there should be as a tool a strong body. So we are entering a domain now where he is going to work on the most material physical consciousness. There's this power of energy condensed, densified. But for that, you need your tool is the necessity is a strong body. You want to really build in the direction that is intended in the integral yoga, which includes the divinization of the physical consciousness. Well, you need as a tool a strong body. Okay. Remember two more things which were required beyond that, the continuity, stability and continuity of ananda and stability and continuity of substance. So of these, the other two stabilities, and especially the last, continuity of substance, especially the last, are still unattained. The last is the most difficult of all. It is the greatest achievement. The one problem that really has yet to be solved and on which the terrestrial security of the others depends. Now it is a command as if coming from source. He's not mentioned anything there. My advice to you is not to mind retracing your steps. She should take food again, the body. The body consciousness. She should take food again and build up the body again as a necessary support. At the same time, as a general rule, try to use the food to the best advantage by concentration upon it and upon the body's reception of it and its right assimilation, so that finally the body can maintain itself in full force and substance with a minimum quantity of stuff, a supreme quality, and a maximum of assimilation. If you read this just like that in itself, it's guideline which can apply to all of us also. But we're still looking at it in a context which is much higher. So, as a general rule, try to use the food to the best advantage by concentration upon it. You take the food, you concentrate. And upon the body's reception of it. As you eat, you concentrate on the body's ability to absorb. And its right assimilation. After it's gone in, the body absorbs fully, assimilates, integrates, so that finally the body can maintain itself in full force and substance with the minimum quantity of stuff. So if you're able to fully absorb, whatever you need is also much less. Currently, let's say your absorption is 1%. So you need to eat 100 times more than your body actually takes. You push that absorption to 10%. You need to eat only 1/10 of that. You push your absorption to 50%, you will need to eat much less. So all depends on the absorption. I'm going to comment on this a little later, but for now, we'll just finish the text. A minimum quantity of stuff can maintain itself in full force and substance with a minimum quantity of stuff. A supreme quality, because you're taking in also more, the quality is different, and a maximum of assimilation. When that has been attained, the necessary adaptation will have neared completion. Advance progressively at first, rapidity will be possible afterwards. So again, it's general advice in anything you do. Make steady progress, rapidity comes later. Do not mind the initial difficulties. Remember, however, that the food problem is only a detail and do not exaggerate its importance. The main thing is to bring down and up the highest supramental from above and deepest from below. This is really the work Sri Aurobindo is working on. The highest is brought down, infusing into the body, and from below, the concealed supermind within matter awakened. To unite them and to obtain the support, sanction, and constant effectuating action of what you call the divine grace, which is a descent from the truth of the Supreme, determining all from the plenitude of the eternal. When you get these things in their fullness, the true material miracles will be possible in their marvelous rapidity and splendor. So here's the direction of the work he's doing in the physical consciousness. There's a very interesting aside here where the guidance he's being given is elaborating on the term divine grace. What you call the divine grace. What is it? You see, we say divine grace will do. What does it mean really? Of course, in a very subjective sense, it is the divine mother freely acting within you, or the mother's force freely acting within you, doing something which transcends even your expectations. But what is it really that is happening? So there's an elaboration of this idea. It is the descent from the truth of the Supreme, determining all from the plenitude of the eternal. So from there, this truth comes. From its fullness, it is able to determine everything freely, directly. That's what we call divine grace. Okay. Now the guidance continues. Equanimity, patience, steadfast faith, steadfast will, dynamic aspiration, increasing knowledge power are the things you need in their harmonious convergence. So all these have to converge, that you may fulfill and conquer. So state of consciousness, but not in the mind, all the way down into the physical consciousness itself. Equanimity, patience, steadfast faith in the physical, steadfast will in the physical, dynamic aspiration in the physical. As it is moving, as it is working, it holds, sustains this aspiration. Increasing knowledge power are the things you need. Then the power of subjective realization in the physical is there as you see more from day to day. It will become absolute. The power through the subjective on the objective is increasing and will infallibly increase still more and become perfect. So what is the subjective objective? There's a subjective power. You feel your consciousness, in this case in the physical, and you feel in that consciousness the change. But that has not yet reflected in the external material substance. You feel subjectively young. Your biology has not yet caught up to reflect that. That's the objective part of it. But the fact that you're subjectively young already allows you to behave like a young person. And so someone looking at you will say, hey, I see the lines of age or whatever the thing will be, but it doesn't feel as if you are. That's the subjective and objective. So objectivization in the substance in form. That's the shift. So the power through the subjective on the objective is increasing. So within, it's pushing to make that change on the outer and will infallibly increase still more and become perfect. The direct power on the most material plane is the one thing still obstinately resisted. Persevere, satisfy the conditions, and it will come to you like the others. So as all the other powers were developed, this also will come to you. Persevere and satisfy the conditions. What are those conditions? That has been discussed before. So you see what he's working on. You see the broad guidelines, even in terms of the role of food in this matter, but also the change of consciousness and the working of consciousness required. Very fascinating, this whole thing. Very suggestive. And after reading this, you'll understand what Sri Aurobindo later wrote about this process itself of the physical transformation in the series of articles, the last few that he wrote, the last 1 year before he left his body, which are published under the title, The Supramental Manifestation upon Earth. It's published as a separate booklet, little thing like this. It's also part of the collected works. You may want to read that, I think 12 or 13 chapters. A long back, when we had started the study of the synthesis of yoga, I had started this series from the year 2000 in Savitri Bhavan in Auroville as a weekly series. And we completed certain portions. Initially, we went through the initial portion, then we jumped to the proper yoga of self-perfection section. After we finished that, it is as if there are certain things in that which are, it's incomplete, the synthesis of yoga, in the portions particularly relating to the physical transformation. So Sri Aurobindo stopped writing around the time when he ended the Arya. He did add a few more chapters afterwards to complete the synthesis of yoga, all the way through the supramental consciousness. But then how it is to be worked upon in the physical, he had kept for later. And he writes in one of the letters that it was his intention to write a few more chapters discussing how, when the supermind acts in the material, what are the difficulties it faces and how to manage those difficulties. But he says he didn't have the time, he didn't write those. In this series of articles, which were 1 year before he lived, he started writing 1 year before. And I think the last of those he wrote about a month or two before he left the body, where he speaks also of the mind of light and so on. So that whole series, I said, to me, it represents those missing chapters of what was missing from the synthesis of yoga, because they deal with the working of the physical consciousness and its transformation. So we took up the study of that. I think it was in the year 2011, we started that, and it went through a series of nearly 73 talks, if I'm right. And those we had at that point uploaded, there was a different platform. YouTube was not allowing more than 10 minutes of the sessions. So I had used a different platform, which then shut down at some point. So unfortunately, therefore, we lost that in the upload. But my intention has been to re-upload this series of talks. And one of the tapes, the first of those tapes, gave a lot of trouble because it's as if the substance was gooey on the surface. We couldn't capture it, but that has been done just now. So I propose to put these online beginning next week. And it will be interesting because it deals with a whole different dimension of the work in which we understand better after reading this. He describes there how exactly the transition will take place. This thing which he describes, transition requiring continuity of consciousness, continuity of energy, continuity of ananda, continuity of substance. Mother puts it differently. The problem is this, she says, from this biology which has built certain mechanisms to do its work, to that framework which is also biology, but a supramentalized biology, which does not need that framework but has its own framework. How do you transition from here to there? For example, the heart is beating, going bloop, bloop, bloop. To do what? To push blood. To do what? To carry nutrition and oxygen and life force to different parts of the body. So you want to get nutrition and life to your fingers, let's say. So it has to push here, pump here, and all the way along, there are actually small undulations of the muscles which push all the way down into the fine capillaries, and the heart is not able to push into the capillaries. So there are things happening here where the entire body literally pulses in rhythm with the heartbeat, but synchronized to be slightly delayed to push until it goes all the way. So this mechanism of pumping for nutrition and life force, finally, it does not exist in the supramentalized body, which does not use such crude means. There it is replaced by an actual force that pushes substance and life force by direct impulse. It does not need this biological structure shaped like this. So how do you make the transition from this pumping machine to that mechanism, which is different? Maybe there's a pumping, but a very different material and very different structure. So it's as if something in between has to make a transition and without losing continuity. So that's the last part, continuity of substance from here to there in that transition. And this is the difficult challenge. She gives this example. Another example you have in the biology, she says, the bone structure, the teeth, they're hard to the point of being inconscient. The moment you make them more and more conscious, that kind of hardness is not acceptable, because when you want it to be super conscious, you want it to be able to be malleable to the will. Anything that is rigid is unable to be malleable and represents a resistance to full free consciousness. So there's a point where in the supramental consciousness, you do not have the bone structure and you do not have the teeth structure in the way they are. But still you have rigidity, because you need to be able to stand and hold and chew. So the rigidity comes by the substance itself being able to harden or soften as needed and hold its own structure. So again, transition from this to that. Continuity of consciousness, he says you have. Continuity of energy is still developing. You're able to do that. Continuity of ananda, not yet there. continuity of substance is the most difficult. So these are questions which are really deep rooted because this is being done in some sense for the first time in evolution. And there's a secret, there's something not found, there's something not yet fully emergent, at least in 1927. And so Sri Aurobindo actually tells you what that secret is in that text, tells you how the transition is to be done. And then he describes, while that process may take time, how can you acquire in your consciousness as it is the perfection of the supramental knowledge while still being in the human mind consciousness. So there's a particular gradation of the mind in which that perfection of the knowledge can enter and build and organize around. And that's what he calls the mind of light. That itself can have gradations, degrees of its evolution. And that he created and built in himself, in his own consciousness, formulated it and built it as a new grade of consciousness with a grade of operation which has not been done before, and then infused that into the mother at the point where he left the body, and of course through her into humanity. So that's all. It's a whole fascinating series of the text, and we explore it in some depth. He speaks of this whole problem of food there also. So I'm proposed to put that online beginning next week. I hope we'll be able to get the edits done clean by that time. And for the next 4 weeks, that's what it will be in place of these talks on Saturday, because I will be traveling and won't be able to come online on the Saturdays. But I think the topic itself will be quite interesting. Some of the tapes, as I said, are a little damaged. The picture might be a little blurry or broken sometimes, but I think the audio should be clear because that is recorded separately. So here I'm going to pause with the text, going back to one thing where I said I will comment on later. And this is the question which, the secret of this transition. So I've spoken of what Sri Aurobindo did, but the mother continued from that point on because he infused that whole work into her, all that he had achieved, and she worked on the physical cells and their transformation. And then at some point, she had even formed in the subtle physical the framework of the body, supramentalized, and was fusing it into the physical body. And that process could have been taken through, but at some point she found that the divine will was not supporting it. Perhaps earth conditions were not ready, or this process bypassed something which was required in the way intended, and so she stopped that. But when she left her physical body, she transferred herself fully into this subtle physical form that she had created, and that's where she is based and working from. So we'll just look back at the key points here. Particularly here, this idea of transition and adaptation. Now, adaptation, I'm going to comment on a little more because what you do see, and I'm speaking now at a more material level in the body as it is, not at the level which Sri Aurobindo was speaking of. We do see that the physical body itself is quite an extraordinary instrument and able to adapt itself almost without limit. There's a particular tribe of divers, I believe they are on the coast of some islands in the Pacific, if I remember right. And this tribe, they dive to find pearls, and they've been doing it for a few generations. As a consequence, you find their biology has adapted, their genetics has been modified so that they can go down and stay down holding their breath for up to 10 or sometimes 15 minutes. The flexibility of the lungs has been modified. The working of the processing of oxygen and the way the blood stores it and the way it avoids having the bends has all evolved within a few generations, that they're able to do something which other human beings cannot, and there's a genetic change because of that. Equally, people who have lived very high up in mountains, where the air is very fine, where you and I will find that we get breathless. And you find little children running up and down the hill as if they were on the plains, they don't get breathless. You find old people climbing up and down the hill, they don't get breathless. Why? There's an adaptation where the body has adjusted its relationship with the oxygen and its ability to hold oxygen in the blood. And one of the things you find, the blood itself has undergone a change, that it is able to have more of the cells that contain the oxygen. And it's able to somehow hold it more efficiently than it can among us on the ordinary planes. And again, there's a physiological change, not necessarily genetic, but probably there is genetic. I've not read any study that shows genetic change, but quite likely there's some adaptation, at least at the level of secondary effects from the genes. But this adaptation, in principle, can be pushed almost without limit, but slowly by slow adaptation. Exactly the same thing happens with regard to food. So if in your family lineage, there's a certain kind of food because you grew up in the desert, or you grew up in a forest, or you grew up in the mountain, or you grew up wherever, and the food was very specific, not necessarily complete in nutrition, the body found a way to manufacture the things which were needed. Sometimes by combining with bacteria. They say today, even now, we are told that our body cannot produce vitamin B12, supposedly. And then there are people who have an excess of vitamin B12, although the food has insufficient B12. Where does that come from? So initially they said, oh, maybe their body has adapted to manufacturing it. Maybe. Or as we find in many of us, we have acquired bacteria in our gut which manufacture the B12, which we then absorb. So where are you getting the food? Not in the food you eat. That food is being fed to the bacteria, and the bacteria feed you the food that you need. In principle, that adaptation of the bacteria in your gut can become pushed to any limit. To the point that, again, we are told our body cannot manufacture vitamin C, so we need to have it regularly through food. Well, the bacteria within your gut can manufacture the vitamin C. And then you'll have a continuous supply of vitamin C, although it's not there in your food. So you have an adaptation, and it's still a body adaptation in the way the bacteria are built up and protected. There's an adaptation potentially possible without limit, given enough time of slow steps of adaptation. And here you get a glimpse of what the body is capable of. This is not yet a shift into a higher supramental transition. Materially, it is still in the biology course subconscious grade. But the adaptation factor exists here, and the same principle has to make an adaptation that way, upward. So we find some interesting things about the mother's observations regarding this, because she was continuing the same work. And she said that at some point, her biology practically needed no food. She was taking minimally. But she was taking more than she needed because she said it was a way of giving respect to the food itself. So certain days it would be just a glass of some juice, not much more. And at some point she said, just breathing the flowers gave her more nourishment than it would have through food that she ate. And of course, she had the ability to absorb directly on the subtle physical level or from the vital energy. An example that she shares of her teacher of occultism, Madame Théon, and she had taken this big fruit that she placed on her abdomen, went into a trance, and after a while, when the mother came back, the entire thing had become completely flat because all the juice, physical substance, had been absorbed directly by passing the digestive process into the physical consciousness. Now, this is what Sri Aurobindo is referring to when he speaks of etheric assimilation. These are all doable. It's not a transformation. These are all doable by us as we are. That's what Madame Théon was doing. Her body was not transformed in this way. So remember, do not make the mistake of comparing these things with what Sri Aurobindo is describing. There are people who do live without food. I've met somebody some last year, I think, or year before, living in Auroville, and she was looking hale and hearty, and she said she just drank a little bit of juice every day, but no proper food, except once a month. And the day she took the food, she said the whole body becomes so heavy and dull, it's not worth it. I'd rather just stay with my juice. And she's completely normal in every way. So technically, you can say no food, maybe juice is the food. But through an adaptation process, the body could be brought to that. It's not transformation. It's not divinization. It's not supramentalization. Do not confuse that. That's pure adaptation of the physical consciousness. It's not this which Sri Aurobindo is talking about. Even though on a superficial level, you might say, oh, he's struggling to reduce food or survive without food. These people have done it. No, it's not the same thing. We're talking of completely different operations. And then there is this occult mechanism. But an occult mechanism bypasses physical transformation. We want the body consciousness to change until it acts as an expression of the divine will. As a consequence, it will not be dependent on food in the way it currently is. The whole goal and method is different. So we'll look at a few more comments of Sri Aurobindo, particularly regarding fasting, so that we put that in context. And this is from a letter of Sri Aurobindo, which is 1935, well after this text, 4th of May. And he writes, we don't know the question, but he's writing in response to someone. I have myself fasted first 10 days and then 23 days, just to see what it was like and how far one could live without food, and certain things like that. I found that it was no good. To take with equanimity, so he doesn't say more, it was no good. To take with equanimity whatever comes or does not come seemed to me more the thing than any violent exercises like that. There are a few more letters where they speak of fasting, and I wanted to read from that. Okay, so this is an important letter. To make your sadhana depend upon not eating is to make a great mistake. When people fast like that, they get into an abnormal condition and can easily mistake imaginations and delusions for true experiences. So this abnormal condition is that your subtle body is at some point forced to separate from the physical to draw nourishment from the vital domains. So suddenly you feel very light, very energetic, but also you get into a kind of a subjective state, not grounded in the physical consciousness or the physical world. And things which you fantasize or imagine can become very real to you, as in a dream state or in an out-of-body state. So he says, much fasting in the end weakens the nervous system. So you must drop this habit of not eating for days together. For yoga, it is a mistake to eat too much, but a mistake also to eat nothing or too little. If you eat too much, you become heavy and tamasic. If you fast and eat too little, you excite the vital energies and finally overexcite them. But at the same time, you weaken the body and the nerves. Both are bad for sadhana. You should eat regularly, a moderate but sufficient amount of food. It is only if there is illness or disturbance of digestion that a low diet or not eating sometimes becomes necessary. But fasting, even for the purpose of resting the stomach, should not last more than a day. For your sadhana, you have to use not outward means like this, but quietness, sincere, peaceful aspiration, openness to the mother. So for purpose of sadhana, these are means much more direct. For health reasons, you might use fasting to correct some disturbance, you're ill, there's been some excess or some imbalance, that's okay. Another letter. So there's a large part which will get repeated, but then there's something additional that he gives. It is a fact that by fasting, if the mind and nerves are solid or the will force dynamic, one can get for a time into a state of inner energy and receptivity. which is alluring to the mind, and the usual reactions of hunger, weakness, intestinal disturbance, etc., can be wholly avoided. So you have a will force which is dynamic, nerves are solid, not everyone can do this. And you can get into this state of inner energy and receptivity. So you're drawing much more on an inner level. But the body suffers by diminution, and there can easily develop in the vital a morbid, overstrained condition due to the inrush of more vital energy than the nervous system can assimilate or coordinate. So what's happening now, because of this, you're drawing much more of life force. That inrush, your biology nervous system is unable to manage. Nervous people should avoid the temptation to fast. It is often accompanied or followed by delusions and a loss of balance. And this is very common. It just makes the person unbalanced and go crazy after a point. Especially if there is a motive of hunger strike or that element comes in, as it did in your case, fasting becomes perilous. For it is then an indulgence of a vital movement which may easily become a habit injurious and pernicious to the sadhana. Even if all these reactions are avoided, there is still there is no sufficient utility in fasting, since the higher energy and receptivity ought to come not by artificial or physical means, but by the intensity of the consciousness and strong will for the sadhana. So here's a very important point for those who are in the integral yoga. For those who are more in the, let's say, ascetic tradition where you want or you don't care for the body and you want somehow even to disbalance the body for supposedly other axis. So you feel lighter, you feel more receptive, you feel as if the aspiration is stronger, more intense, you are full of more energy. Everything feels nicer because the gross body's dullness, heaviness has been, so to say, subdued or separated. The moment you stop fasting, you lose all that. The moment you change your diet, you lose all that. Then something is wrong. So this is one of the key points of Sri Aurobindo's approach, that he says, you can do certain things by artificial means, but the goal is to be able to do those same things by direct operation of consciousness. As long as you use artificial means by whatever technique, you're dependent on those means and the fundamental consciousness has not undergone change. Now, for practical reasons, you may do those anyway. You take certain medicines, you take certain supplements. They are indirect methods of making up for a lack, but eventually you should find the correction internally. That's a question of priority. I might concentrate more on some higher part of the development, and for the biology, well, I just give it the supplements it needs. But eventually, someday, when I have to deal with the body consciousness, I'll have to deal with that issue. That's the question of prioritizing. But from the perspective of integral yoga, any external reliance on indirect methods is a lack. It's not a perfection. So that's the point he makes. You should be able to attain to the same thing which you're getting, not by artificial or physical means, but by intensity of consciousness and the strong will for the sadhana. By that, you should be able to develop that same quality of lightness, openness, feeling of the intensity of the aspiration, etc., irrespective of what you have eaten as food. Obviously, you don't have to take on excessively tamasic food, but taking a general basic food pattern, you should be able to have the experience irrespective of this. And I can confirm this not only in my own experience, but in the experience of many with whom I've worked in this, to say that irrespective of the food you have eaten, the full access to the inner and higher ranges of consciousness are available. The key there will be generally in consciousness first to disengage from the very superficial identification with the body. If you sit for meditation, you consciously disengage from the biology and its dullness, and then you find your full access. With that access, then you can come back into the body and infuse it and teach the body then to build the continuity and teach it then to have that experience. Even warns in one of the letters, he says, the nerves get into an excited, tense condition when they do not collapse and invent realizations or open to a wrong force if you're fasting to get some realization. At least that often happens, he writes. So another nice letter, again, some repetition. The idea of giving up food is a wrong inspiration. You can go on with a small quantity of food, but not without food altogether, except for a comparatively short time. Remember what the Gita says. Yoga is not for one who eats in excess, nor for one who abstains from eating altogether. That's the quote from Yoga, from Gita. Vital energy is one thing. Of that, one can draw a great amount without food, and often it increases with fasting. But physical substance, without which life loses its support, is of a different order. If at any time it becomes possible to renew the body without food, and that proved necessary for the yoga, the mother and I would be the first to do it. So keep to your established diet and do not get impatient with nature. So I think the last, which I will read from one of the letters, which directly deals with the transformation of consciousness and relationship with food. The transformation to which we aspire is too vast and complex to come at one stroke. It must be allowed to come by stages. The physical change is the last of these stages and is itself a progressive process. So you're going top down in the transformation. The inner transformation cannot be brought about by physical means, either of a positive or a negative nature. So it's not as if you do these physical things, the inner consciousness changes. That doesn't happen. On the contrary, the physical change itself can only be brought about by a descent of the greater supramental consciousness into the cells of the body. Till then, at least the body and its supporting energies have to be maintained in part by the ordinary means, food, sleep, etc. Etc. I will include exercise for most of us at least. Food has to be taken in the right spirit with the right consciousness. So priority of food is the consciousness with which you take. Sleep has to be gradually transformed into the yogic repose. Instead of going to inertia, you go into a state in which you enter an inner or higher state and the body gets its rest. A premature and excessive physical austerity, tapasya, may endanger the process of the sadhana by establishing a disturbance and abnormality of the forces in the different parts of the system. A great energy may pour into the mental and vital parts, but the nerves and the body may be overstrained and lose the strength to support the play of these higher energies. So what can actually happen as this infusion takes place of large amount of vitality, your nerves can't support and the body gets into an imbalanced state. You'll find bursts of anger, you'll find even eventually sicknesses and breakdown. The body, gross body, breaks down because there's too much vitality and it can't contain it. So all these problems can happen. If you do build up that kind of vitality, you have to also build the physical strength to match it. And the transition has to be smooth and gradual so that the two always maintain their right relationship. You're building a new relationship with greater vitality or greater energy. And the body also needs to adapt to manage that. So that whole process has to take a few months, sometimes years, before the fullness of it can be had. This is the reason why an extreme physical austerity is not included here as a substantive part of the sadhana. There is no harm in fasting from time to time for a day or two, or in reducing the food taken to a small but sufficient modicum. But entire abstinence for a long period is not advisable. So these were some letters we saw. Just another letter, 1933. On the 24th, Mother, Lord, on the 24th, I shall take my food only after having your darshan. Mother, Lord, destroy all my wrong thoughts and feelings. Someone has written. Response very sharp from Sri Aurobindo. That is quite wrong. Fasting will not in the least remove any bad things. It is by receiving the mother's light and force in you that they will go. You must eat tomorrow. The other letters which deal with the role of fasting and even the occult uh, benefits or not. There's one particular which I want to read from, which is regarding Mahatma Gandhi's thing, 1933, 5th May. There are a few letters, in fact. So no, there's 1934, July 12th. Question. Someone was speaking to me about Gandhi's 7-day fast. I said, is it to create an earthquake for the sake of the Harijans? At least his own earth body will quake. Now, this is the person who's writing the letter. Sri Aurobindo's reply. It seems to be very foolish, these fasts, as if they could alter anything at all. A fast can at most affect one's own condition, but how can it atone for the doings of others or change their nature? So Gandhi would say, I'm going on a fast because I'm going to atone for somebody's crime or my own crime, or I'm going to change that situation by going on a fast. And Sri Aurobindo's comment is very direct, blunt. Another letter, 1933 May. Questioner writes, this second fast of Mahatma Gandhi of 3 weeks has disquieted me a little. There seems to be no way out, for Gandhi asserts that he can break his irrevocable fast only if he is persuaded that the inner voice which enjoins the fast on him is the voice not of God but of the devil. So Gandhi thinks his voice of God which is telling him to fast. If you can convince him it is the devil, then he'll break the fast. I wonder whose voice it is though. Can it be anything but disastrous augury? Sri Aurobindo's reply. I don't think it was the voice of God that raged and thundered till Gandhi decided to starve himself onto the danger line. It looks as if it were the other fellow, the devil. One can only hope that he will scrape through somehow, and that the doctors are wrong, as they most often are when they opine in the plural. But the last experiment was not encouraging. So I think we'll read the whole. It's humorous. And as this time there seems to be no reason whatever for this inspired procedure and no practical or practicable object set before it, so he's fasting for no reason. There is no tangible means either of bringing it to a timely close. What an extraordinary ignorance of spiritual things to take any inner shout for the command of the Supreme. So this is a good warning. It's an ignorance of spiritual things, that anything which comes from inside, some voice, some shouting from inside, you take as a command from God. It's not how it works. Anything can do that, you know. There was another person in the ashram who had got unbalanced, and his name was Tirupati, and he had some problem. He used to fast, and he did eventually get unbalanced, and he had to be sent out. So there's a couple of letters which are addressed to him. One of them, he is told directly by Sri Aurobindo, you cannot come till you have stopped fasting altogether. You cannot come till you have descended into the ordinary physical consciousness and remained there for months together. You cannot see me at Pondicherry, you cannot see me again at Pondicherry until you are ready to meet me on the physical plane. And that can only be when you have accepted the physical consciousness and the physical life. This is definite. So he was doing all kinds of things which had unbalanced him. Anyway. So I think we will stop with that for the fasting. I will come back to the actual letter of Jose and comment on this whole shift that he has made in the food which has gone into this special diet. And my response will be simply here, it is an adaptation. If you chose to enter this special diet, initially the body was disbalanced. Eventually there has been an adaptation, and you have perhaps adapted to it to some extent. I do not think the adaptation itself would last too long, though, because ultimately the body's real adaptation is often rooted in what it has acquired through hereditary influence or early childhood life, or the longest duration of the life that you have lived. So what will tend to happen is at some point the body will start giving signals that it is unable to manage, in this case, the excessive meats or animal fats, perhaps. Or, for example, those who go on a keto diet. Yes, it's good. Yes, it works. But eventually you find it has other side effects for which you must ensure you take enough water, you take whatever else. You have to make corrections. If the body is fully adapted, you will never have to worry about corrections, or the body instinct itself will make those corrections. So my first comment would be generally, it is no big deal whether you eat this or that. Rather, try to feel what your body naturally feels comfortable with and find what works and settle into what works, whatever that is. Not too important. Whether it's meat, whether it's not meat, how much is secondary from this point of view. Find what feels right for the body. I'm going to give an example here because you also asked your personal diet, how has it evolved? Initially, I was very driven by idealism at the age of around 12. So my mother was already experimenting a lot with food. She had us do various kinds of fast and all kinds of mono meals and all kinds of Ayurvedic as well as naturopathic things, which we had explored and experimented with. And among them, we came across some books which dealt with raw foods, and that seemed to be perfect. The logic was your body is not designed for cooking. You are designed to be living originally in the forest, in nature. So the way nature provides is optimum. You should take just that. It made a lot of sense. And so we tried that. It felt good. It was almost like a kind of a fasting because you're eating something so different initially. It's very light. Your body feels light. But at some point, I did it at least from age 12 till 22. And what I found eventually was just the chewing took so long, you got tired, you ate less. Second, while the body felt light, it felt very conscious, all the benefits were there on that level, it was weak. And it was unable to sustain certain kinds of sustained effort of work. What I did not realize at that time, we didn't have accessible blood tests, is that it was malnourished, severely malnourished. Much later, after my teacher told me, you better get back to normal food, I did. It made a difference. The hungers and the craving hungers faded, which used to happen frequently earlier. There was a certain dulling, but that could be corrected by consciousness, and that was very obvious. But much later in life, as I was continuing normal food and the normal dining room food, plus whatever else might come my way, I found two things. When I was traveling, the body often felt better nourished than when I came home, where the food was predominantly what came from the dining room. Second, I found every time I would travel and come back home, I would fall sick. And it was every time, to a point where I thought it was a consciousness issue. But about 5 years ago, I had visited somebody in Delhi, and he had at that point started this, what they call functional medicine hospital. And being a good friend, he invited me to see that. It was nice. I did some project with them. And he did a blood test for me. And the results showed, it was the first time in a long time I had a blood test. And the results showed I was severely deficient in vitamin B12 and D3. Severe meaning dangerously low. I began to take supplements. It felt better. Then I realized that despite whatever good food I was eating, which was the dining room food plus whatever else, it was insufficient. And the body was malnourished. I began to take other supplements, corrected for some of these deficiencies. The result was since then I never fell ill. when I was traveling or coming back from travels. I have had some occasional illnesses, but they were quite on extreme situations, not in this casual way that was happening earlier. Every month I would have at least one cold or some infection. All that has stopped since then. So my comment here again is, your food that you have adapted to also, which you like perhaps, your body may not be able to get enough nutrition from it for reasons which today are outside the domain of your control. And that has to do with the poisons which are pumped in the food or in the soil, in the form of either pesticides or the things used to stimulate plants to grow faster. With these two, you are interfering with the normal plant growth. Let's say a plant grows 3 times faster or twice faster, the nutritional content is lower. You can't force a plant to grow fast without it losing something in the process. So all these new varieties of rice and other grains or even fruits that they are modifying the genes for to make them grow fast or grow large, they are full of water, they're full of fat, but they do not have nutrition as before. The result is you're eating the same quantity, the body is not getting the necessary nutrition. And in particular, the soil is being depleted because of this excessive infusion of chemicals in the soil, which are damaging the soil itself. And one of the consequences is some of those chemicals, whether it is pesticide or others, as they come in with the food into your body, they trigger in your body the negation of absorption of certain key nutrients. So your body is unable to absorb those things which it would have normally got. The result is severe deficiencies. Almost every vegetarian today has B12 deficiency, vitamin D3 deficiency, and often iron deficiency. These are 3 things I'm seeing very common everywhere. And these being raw materials, it's affecting the full chain. So rather than going into some very complex indirect method of absorbing this, which I think is what's coming to you through the meats, make the correction of this directly through supplementation, and you'll find you don't need so much meat. You might even find you don't need so much food. In my case, there was a 4th thing which I found missing, and there was insufficient proteins. So what was coming from the dining room food may have been at some point sufficient when the foods were themselves of a different order. But from the point where we have all these modified foods, it was insufficient even in proteins. And I remember as a child when I was eating dining room foods, almost every vegetable every day had greens. And those greens have vanished now. Mostly they're not there, or occasionally, very rarely there. So there were things which were coming in which have been missing. The result of which I would find after the stomach is full, my body is still craving. I couldn't figure out what it was until recently when I started doing some work with body weights, with pumping of weights. Then I was advised, of course, you have to take additional proteins. So I started taking this whey proteins. Taking that, suddenly the body felt, yes, now I'm satiated. The craving vanished. So this was another lack which was there at that level. Now, if you have all these lacks as a vegetarian, you might neutralize them by eating excessive meat, animal fat, etc. Somehow indirectly you're getting these things which were missing. Or you could have stayed with the same diet you had, filled in with supplementation of the things you required, and you'd have perhaps come to the same result. Which is more natural for your body, more healthy, more in tune with its habit pattern is what you have to look at. And if you need to change, make sure it's a transition where the body adapts gradually to whatever level of balance works for you. As such, I'll say it does not matter. From a consciousness and a yoga point of view, none of these would matter. If you feel somehow dependent on that food to have clarity of consciousness, then I would suggest you work a little more on how you do this access to the higher consciousness, irrespective of the food. Because very quickly what will happen, the moment you chase this, you will start reducing food. And because it feels lighter, your consciousness is clearer because you're lighter. and you start pushing it to the limit until it starts unbalancing something. So what you need to do is train yourself, irrespective of what food you've taken, which is now based on the body's natural comfort, not necessarily deliberately excess, but whatever is the balance. And then consciously, when you sit to concentrate, learn to intensify your aspiration, concentrate inwardly in the consciousness itself, and turn it and amplify and intensify it. Once you're able to do this, you'll find this you can build completely free and independent of your biology's condition. If you can get to this point, you'll find it actually doesn't matter too much what food you ate. Of course, occasionally when you're very dulling foods, it'll make you sleepy. Other than that, the access to the consciousness would not be affected. Your reduction in quantity of food is perhaps because it's more nutrient rich. You could have modified by taking even other vegetarian food with supplementation. So to me, that is somehow secondary. The mother did make a comment. Your question about can you reduce and how much can you reduce? The mother did make a comment at some point that in the future, it will be possible to take just a minimal quantity of nutritional food. And even to the point, and because I remember this as a child, Panditji had, my teacher, MP Pandit, had made these comments. They were talking about it in the house, and I'd heard this, that the mother had made a comment that in the future you'll take a single pill and that'll have all the nutrition you need and the body would manage with it. Obviously, the body is not adapted to that. But what may happen in time, that as the body learns to absorb and optimize the absorption, there will be a reduction in the quantity necessary, and just a little bit, which is nutrient rich, would be enough. So I'm going to come to one other observation, which is very important, which is actually part of the record of yoga, which unfortunately is not published. So we're going to go into a domain which is a little off what we can read from, but it's a fascinating side. In the record of yoga, Sri Aurobindo has described in great detail not only his spiritual experiences, but also, as in this case, you see the effect on the biology, physical consciousness, and the working of the biology as a result of the working of the higher force in the biology. So it seems he has also noted in great detail the shift in the biology working at the level of the food intake as well as the outflow from the body in the form of urine or feces. And in the record of yoga itself, he has noted color, quantity of both of these. For whatever reason, the people who were bringing out decided to leave that out. They felt, from what I understand, that it was too personal. I personally don't think it should have been done. It should have been kept as it is, because it would be a complete documentation of how much he went in detail for all these things, and also what he was looking for, what were the signs. So since I don't know, I have not read those portions, I will fall back to what we learned from Ayurveda about these things. And what we learn is this, that as your body's ability to absorb, the digestive power and absorption power grows, the quantum of food you need is less because it is able to extract more from the food. And one of the signs that it is digesting well is that there is less waste material that comes out. So for a given food that you take, let's say you have a volume of X, we'll call it 100 of whatever unit. Normally you take 100 and what goes out may be 90. In this case, you'll take 100 and what goes out may be 10% of what comes in. All the rest has been absorbed. Now, the moment you're absorbing 90%, let's say, the quantity required is much less. So you may end up eating much less. You have a 90% absorption, the waste material is much less. So one of the signs considered in a Ayurveda that your digestion is very strong is that the output is significantly smaller than the input. And that's a sign of the digestive power, absorptive power. So I believe Sri Aurobindo would have probably been observing this among other things. I don't know. This is pure speculation because I didn't see that part of the text. But you do find in the text that we read this comment that he makes about absorption and the ability to assimilate, increase the assimilation. And then I think, let's see if. So Jose's question now comes to future potential. Will be able to maintain a more optimized physical vehicle without having to eat dense matter. Yes, perhaps the quantum will reduce. There may be a degree of subtilization, which you see, for example, in the mother's body, where she said the flower perfume was more nourishing than the gross physical food that she took. My personal diet I have described, and for me, it was a major wake up call, because what had happened was I had taken the general attitude that whatever food was given to me in the dining room, which contained mother's force, would be enough to make up for what was required. For whatever reason, it was not. You may say it was from a lack of faith in the physical consciousness, etc. Maybe. But whatever it is, the end result was that it was not, and I was severely deficient to the point where the body was falling sick for no clear reason. The correction made there solved it all. Now, even if you say it's your body consciousness which was not receptive, fine. And I had no way to correct for that directly. So should I stay suffering in sickness? No. I have to find out what is the body's faith and give it what it wants, which in this case was the supplementation. So irrespective of the cause, my point would be observe what is deficient and correct for it. Get your body into a strong, healthy base, which is absolutely necessary for this yoga, where the goal is an integral transformation. You want the mind, you want the vital, and even the physical consciousness to be fully capable of receiving the full divine afflatus and becoming a powerful vehicle for its action in the world. Biology, strength, solidity, resilience, flexibility, plasticity, adaptability, consciousness, all these are critical because it's the basis for everything else. All the other bodies lean back on the biology. So these are some observations I'll make. What about discoveries from your path on your journey that hint at future possibilities? So here I can suggest a few things. I've spoken of in passing in a couple of talks before about aging and age regression. So there's a lot of work happening today in this direction, where we have found that the body cellular aging can be reversed by certain triggers, which are called Yamanaka factors, the 4 of them. If you use all 4, the body becomes cancerous. You use 2 of them, and there's age regression at a cellular level. Now, if that can be done by an external trigger, in principle, it can be done by internal means. So there is actually a possibility where, and again, it does not require the spiritual or supramental consciousness. It can be done by vital energy. You tap into a particular grade of vital energy, which you direct into the physical tissue, and it does a kind of an age regression. To get that particular quality is key. How would you do that? Well, you can amplify vital energy through pranayam, for example. But which grade? It's the grade you're drawing. So in this case, for age regression, there is a particular grade. You have to be able to find it. But to be able to find it, you have to psychologically put yourself in that mode, which means what? Psychologically, you have to tune yourself to become that youthful person, that youthful consciousness. And then the quality of energy you will draw in that grade will have that youthful effect in the biology. Now, you'll notice people who are biologically aged but very young in consciousness, and then that reflects in the biology. They are doing this indirectly. This you could do directly also. You could also, as discussed for other things, make for this correction through supplementation, through biology means, technical means. Of course, it has nothing to do with spiritual life, but I do believe all of us who are serious about the sadhana and who want to do as much as possible in this physical lifetime should access every technological means available for keeping the body young, healthy, and if possible, even regressing age to the extent required or to the extent possible. For that, you will read up the literature. One of the most advanced in this field is Dr. David Sinclair. You may read a lot of his work. There are others who have also done similar work. We discovered recently, for example, metformin, which is used for diabetes, actually has an age regression effect on the cells. So you should look at, this is not medical advice, we should look at the literature and see that certain supplementations like resveratrol and NMN, etc., can have an age regression effect on the cells. Use that if available, but more and more, if possible, make the psychological shift. Because at the end of the day, the psychological shift will have a tendency to override even biological processes. You could make yourself younger by this, but older from that. Or make yourself younger, but in a cantankerous and a very nasty mold, which the soul says not worth keeping, and it may still find means to exit. So it's the psychological, spiritual shift, which is still going to be a priority, but use all biological means available. I think that's all that comes to me at this point for Jose's question. I'll just look at the chat box and see if there's anything we can also address from there. Yes, so many appreciated Narad's intervention and what he shared. Revati says, I once had a great opportunity to attend Narad's music choir, Om choir. After the session, he hugged everyone. He hugged everyone. The love that he transmitted was, in simple words, divine. Yes, he's one of the very few people that I know today who's able to transmit something of the mother's love, even in the physical contact. So yes, it's very precious. So I keep telling him it's important that he continues as much as possible. Stay in the body, do the work you have to do, despite whatever discomforts may be involved, and those we will try to reduce. So Jessica makes this comment. There's a parable that if one were to lift up a newly born calf every day, as the calf grows to become full-grown buffalo, you'll be strong enough to lift the full-grown buffalo. Yes, there are stories like that, which you say progressively you could build to any level of strength. I did believe this when I was younger. I did work in that direction, but I found in practice there were points of failure. What would happen? I'll just give the example of this calf. As the calf is growing, yes, you're becoming stronger. It's like weightlifting. But there's a point where your biology hits a limit. At that point now, when you lift the calf, your muscles are strong, but your spine and the sponge between the bones, that is collapsing. That is getting damaged. So you notice muscle building has a pace of growth which is much faster. But to build resilience in the cartilage between the bones, is that growing stronger by taking weights? Doesn't look like it. Perhaps it needs to be addressed in a different way, or for that you have to go slower. But eventually that would get compressed. And one day suddenly as you lift, suddenly you get a pain, nerve gets pinched, and you fall. And after that you can't lift anymore. And all your muscle drops. So I found in practice, while one part could grow, some other part failed. And its failure would trigger a catastrophic failure in a chain reaction where the whole system would break down. And then, of course, you rebuild, but you somehow are never able to cross that threshold. So there are issues in the body, and it's complex interchange between different parts. Not all of them grow at the same pace. Not all of them are conscious enough even to be drawn into this graded growth that you may do. So unless at that point you resorted to some occult means where you brought in a huge form of vitality or reduced the weight of the calf by some means, you might not be able to continue beyond a point. And that point would be a sudden breakdown. It would break this, what seems to be a continuous growth. So it is complex, unfortunately. And that's why all external means are good up to a point. Eventually, one has to find an internal means for a real resilient transformation. Rampal asks, so we are absorbing what we need from the food and exclude the bad things? Not always. So a lot depends on the biology habit. Your biology habit may also be to absorb bad things. What determined that? Some of it would be hereditary, some of it would be habit from childhood in the food you ate, and some of it may be consequence of your state of consciousness. So for example, you say that diabetes can be hereditary. It's a habit again, but inherited habit. Or diabetes can be triggered by the food you take in childhood by association with certain things. Or it may be triggered by lack of certain nutrients, which then cause diabetes. And you think it's hereditary when it's actually lack of nutrients in the family history of its food. It can be complex. And the third can be the result of psychology. Because you're in a foul mood, you align with things of that grade of vibration which are better absorbed. Or body's inability to reject, because you live in a consciousness that it corresponds to. How can you reject what is already within you as you? So eventually, if you look at all these three, your entry point is the psychological correction. That will seep then to override all the others. Always recognize your freedom starts with the things that you can change most easily. Start with those and then expand. In this particular case, I'll add a fourth item. With food, a lot comes in, especially from a spiritual point of view, in the vibes of the person who cooked the food or handles it. You'll feel it if you're sensitive enough. So what you can do and what you should do as a routine if you want to make the spiritual benefit of this, you receive the food, you invoke consciously and feel the divine presence, bring it into the food, let it fill, surround the food, let it purify, consecrate the food. It'll remove all the negative things, if there might be some, to the extent it can at that moment. And then you eat with that attunement. This will give you the maximum spiritual benefit of whatever the food that you're taking. As you eat, you can hold an intention, you can hold an awareness of a quality, and all of these will go a long way, even in the digestion, absorption, and assimilation of the food and for the spiritual benefit. So Vivek is asking, since we're talking about mastering the physical, do you know if there are ways to cure cataract without replacing with a lens, with an artificial lens, or is there a way to cure diabetes? So I'll first give a general reply. Yes, in principle. The problem is the in principle may not be accessible to all in practice. It would mean you become conscious of your eyes, in the tissue and substance of your eyes, for example. And there you could put a sustained will, which will correct for it. If there is a physical external cause, then you'll have to find and also remove that. Otherwise, on one side you're correcting, another side you're recreating. And there's a struggle, which is stronger, which is faster. For example, if you're taking certain foods, which trigger in you a strong insulin reaction, you may correct the psychological cause, but the food trigger might still come. And some of these have to do with pesticides. And I had read a lot of literature along these lines. I found people claiming that certain things were helping even to eventually dissolve cataract or to cure diabetes. In my own case, I was found to be pre-diabetic. It helped me. If you see, there's a video I had put up in this channel, a talk by one Dr. Sanjay Bhatnagar, where he was describing methods for correction of diabetes. And I had taken up that approach. It helped me a lot. After a certain point, I felt I was able to sustain that approach without making that excessive adjustment to the diet. And it was able to, keeping certain things in check in the food, I was able to sustain that. And so far, it seems to have worked. I never got into full-blown diabetes, but I was pre-diabetic to that extent. So yes, a lot of these things can be corrected by psycho-spiritual means. But it means you must really put awareness in that part. It's not like taking a pill. Where you take a pill, you're not conscious of what it does, you're not conscious of where it acts. That's the advantage of physical means. They act physically on physics, on the biology. You are up there, you're unaware of where it's happening, how it's happening. It's part of the machinery of nature, the habit of nature. So you're tapping into its habit patterns and using the habit patterns to correct other habit patterns. But when you intervene from above by consciousness, you become aware of those habit patterns, you change them fundamentally. That is the greatest freedom you will have, with which you can make certain pretty dramatic cures. In this particular case, I will say combine both. Act from the psycho-spiritual action top down, make that part conscious. And on the other side, use also the biological interventions. Where possible, and where I have suggested things, not in this case, but other things, I will hit on every point available so that you get full spectrum engagement for correction. And so, yes, things can be done like this. Mahesh is asking, the human body seems to function with only nature's intelligence, like animals and plants. Is there any divine physical intelligence specific to the human body, matter-wise? Yes, so when you speak of animals and plants, there is an intelligence working, largely vital, life force in the plants. In the animals, you have vital and a little bit of mind. In the human being, the mind part has developed to the point of intellect, buddhi, and self-awareness, which buddhi gives. You're self-aware, you're conscious that you're conscious. You can modify your state of consciousness. So this is the key element distinguishing human beings from the others, which also gives it the potential then to intervene on its own life processes and mind processes. Being self-aware, you can modify your mind processes, and through that modify life processes and modify biology processes. So again, how you do this? There are indirect and direct methods. Indirect is I observe through scientific study, muscles grow in this way or that way. They need this to grow, and these are more efficient, those are less efficient. For example, if you're doing weights, the instinct, physical, superficial instinct is to say, I will pump more. So I pull harder weight with a heavy weight. No, but the science shows your muscles grow stronger not when you pull, but when you let go. Understanding this is again your mind now using existing knowledge. What you do is, let's say you lift the weight with two hands, and then with the second hand lightly supporting, you let go and slowly drop the weight as slowly as you can with a little bit of support, eventually no support. So it's called asymmetric training. The result is in the letting go where your muscle are stretching out with the weight, you actually build muscle at that point. If you follow this method, your bodybuilding process can be dramatically simplified and reduced in terms of effort and time to gain the same result. Now, what is this? This is mind turning upon itself and then observing its own machinery all the way down to biology and playing with it. So this is an indirect way of intervening, but it's a power which comes from this intelligence. The same thing could be done directly intervening subjectively inside, where the mind directs life force into the muscle tissue, puts into it a certain intention using whatever means, either feeling directly or visualizing indirectly. And as you do the same exercise, you bring in that factor and you amplify it even more, and so on. So yes, we have this. That's still human. From here, you can then turn to something higher, bring a higher intuitive or grade of consciousness, which then can further amplify again dramatically. But this intelligence, self-aware, is your link, is your key, both downward and upward, and creates the link from the top higher to the lower and makes everything, potentially with no limit possible. So Revati is asking, could you suggest another way of optimizing the gut microbiome rather than taking supplements and probiotics and bacteria vital beings? Yes and no. Actually, the bacteria, technically, the mother describes as physical condensation of certain vibrations, which are vital, physical almost. But there are material condensations of that. So if you dissolve that level, the bacteria just dies and breaks up. If you amplify that or change the quality of that, the quality of bacteria changes. I've mentioned this before, so but I think these are things which are rarely touched, so it's worth repeating. There's a fascinating research that shows, first of all, your gut microbiome is unique to you. So totally unique that there are bacteria there which it seems no one else has. But they're of a certain type of family which are similar to others, but distinctly yours. There's something else which I came across, fascinating research, that you have an environmental microbiome that is around your physical body, in the air around, is a microbiome of unique bacteria patterns which are specific to you, not just on your skin, but in the air around you. And what is interesting is the research shows you this, but there is nothing in the rationale of why it should be so, because supposedly the air is being constantly blown away. What maintains this? It's almost as if a condensation of your aura, as if your aura at its most material grade is represented as a microbiome of bacteria, etc. And that uniqueness is a reflection of your state of consciousness in the aura, of course. But I will extend this logic to say that it is the state of consciousness which is also condensed in the gut microbiome, which makes for your distinct microbiome. So when you begin to change your consciousness, not just in the head, not just in the mind, but all the way down into the vital, and particularly that part where the vital meets the physical, that's the abdominal region where the center of that exists. So vital, physical, physical, vital, that range. When you bring about a shift there, it will immediately reflect in a shift in gut bacteria. Or, as it works out in the evidence, you change the gut bacteria and the state of consciousness of the person significantly changes. Of course, they say it connects to the brain, gut-brain axis, it changes brain behavior, etc. But it's more than brain. It changes that grade of consciousness, vital, physical, which is the basis for a lot of your life processes. And so through that also influences the brain, or more than that, the mind. So observe, eventually it boils down to consciousness. Change that grade, but tapping that grade is difficult for most of us. We've never worked to enter that consciousness or shift that state. At best, we work on the mental states and the higher emotional states. We rarely are able to tap into that grade. But if you can, you'll actually change the gut bacteria. And with that, a lot of illnesses would go away. And you see there the root of how emotional or lower vital states have a direct impact on biological illness. There's a particular book by a lady called something with H, who made a correlation between psychological states and illnesses. I don't know if someone remembers the name, you can type the name out. But I'd forget the name. So I'd once explored a little bit that angle, and particularly I'd done some work with both heart disease and with diabetes. And one of the things I found in diabetes was that a lot of it related to I won't use the word self-hate. At that time, I had found the precise vocabulary. I can look at those notes, but it was as if some part which disliked or refused some part within you. I don't like the way that I am. I don't like this part of me. That turn of consciousness was triggering, reflected in the biology, a kind of an autoimmune reaction. A lack of love and affection was associated with that. So I was trying to feel the quality of consciousness which was causing this and articulating it in these words. I don't remember now, but there were 4 facets to it. But these were 2 facets that I now recall. I'd made some detailed notes about it. And then I tried to find similar things with regard to the heart. And this was part of that work I had done with the IVM. They wanted me to give a framework of psychological correlation with the treatment mechanism. So it was interesting for a while. It required to get into that state and feel and try to articulate. But I remember these 2 things regarding diabetes, which was quite fascinating. So if you observe the correction of that tendency in you, if you can really go down to the root of it, and you are able to reverse that, all the symptoms of diabetes dramatically reduce immediately. They don't go away immediately, but they reduce dramatically from one day to the next, literally. And then when you let go and those tendencies come back, you find the symptoms again popping up. It takes time to stabilize. Just as in the biology, there's a habit, in the psychology, there's a habit. So you make that correction more and more. You have to redo sometimes until you have found the new rhythm and this becomes the new habit. Then you'll find all those symptoms have dramatically reduced and they stay low, eventually just fade out. But they don't go away instantly, totally, because it still has to seep all the way to the most material part of you. So I'm just giving this as an example of how that kind of correction can be made. So coming to your question about probiotics and supplements, it's as if your biology itself is capable of developing those probiotics, those gut bacteria eventually. They're materializations of that vibration. But since you're not able to tap into that, use the external mechanism. What happens there is you take in a fresh load of a range of bacteria, typically through pickles and others, lightly fermented things, yogurt. The body absorbs from it and retains the things which correspond to its vibration or your intention. But if you're pushing it a strong positive influx, it tends to overwhelm the negative. What is interesting with bacteria is it's not as if you take it now and it changes immediately. The body resists. It does not stick to the new ones. But eventually, over a few weeks, sometimes over a few months, it begins to make the shift in the microbiome. That itself shows you that it's not just inserting bacteria there. It's about sustaining that, the grade of consciousness that indirectly you have inserted by external intervention. Exactly the same thing will happen through a physical healing. Somebody puts their hand and pumps a very dense grade of life force. It will have a similar effect because it brings that quality of consciousness. It happens often when people are very close together physically. Sometimes married people will tend to acquire symptoms from one to the other. One didn't have diabetes, after a while tends to acquire diabetes that the other had because of the strong interchange of that grade of energy. So there are things like that which you cannot fully explain unless you understand this energetic connection. But my general approach here is simply because you don't have access to that layer, use every means possible on all layers. Start with the psychological, but supplement with the physical. And the combination of these would give you the most rapid and perhaps the most complete results. So Quartz is asking, what do you think of whey and plant protein? Should we take it? Is there a lot of there's a lot of mixed information on the net about this. And Beauty is asking about spirulina. I'm not going to have to make very clear this is not medical advice. So I can only say what I have understood or observed in my own limited experience. And what I found for me particularly, the whey isolate as distinct from protein powder, whey isolate, which is slightly more persistent condensed, I found it worked for my body. I'll simply say try out several things, see what works for you. That's your starting point. In terms of quantity, again, there are recommendations. They will tell you per kg of body weight, you must have 1 gram of protein, etc. Start with something which is about half of that. If you find it benefits, increase a little bit. When you find it does not benefit you anymore, drop back until you find the level where it makes a difference. Stop there. Do not take excess because that has its own issues. But most important is if you're taking an extra protein, also you must expend that in terms of physical activity. If you are having a life of no activity, probably you're already in excess. But if you're doing weights where you're breaking down muscle tissue and rebuilding, then you might need to, in fact, boost a little bit to match your activity. And often your body will tell you. The best would be build the body awareness, sensitivity to body awareness, allow the body, not greed, but the body consciousness which is behind the vital greed, to reach out and indicate what it needs. Remember what Sri Aurobindo said there about the vital physical as distinct from the physical vital. Physical vital is vital energies turned to body, and that's the part where the greed comes. Physical vital is the physical consciousness turning to life from below, and that's the one which gives you hunger and says, this is good, this is bad, this feels right, this does not feel right. That's the instinct in the animals which makes them eat the plant, which will heal them, etc. That's rooted, that's already there in you. If you can Leave out the vital, physical, and the greed which comes with that. Learn to tap into this layer and just feel in the body tissue, stomach, tongue, and learn to trust it. But it cannot tell you that's the food I want. It'll just say this works or this doesn't work. So there's a point where you have to try out many things, see what feels right, and trust that. But also use your intelligence to verify, double check. Having done this for a month, check whether actually your B12 levels have gone up. Check whether your body is feeling better, stronger, more healthy. Observe the symptoms. If you really want to work in this way, you have to constantly validate, verify, but also try out things. Don't be stuck with some preconception which actually prevents you from widening out. Sometimes a very strong preconception can even block the help that we might get from a certain food. So you must be very open and willing to try out and see what works. So yes, perhaps spirulina works for some people. Some people don't like the smell, but it might still work. Try out, I would say. Mm. V-Truth says, the first time I saw Mother in a video of her walking in a garden, I felt that otherworldliness. I'm catching up the rest of the session. Okay, so she's just watching now. Yes, that touch of that higher, it comes through in some of the photographs is so amazing. And if you can catch that, you get a glimpse of how the divine reality, so to say, leans into matter and reveals something of its divinity. And it's a very small glow of what actually is when you look at this which is behind. And that's why it's so important to not stop with the external form and go to that which is living through the form. And then you feel the fullness of who she is. Just last few questions. Quartz is saying, what do you think of laser treatment for removing myopia? Does it have side effects? So I've heard people who have had excellent results, and I've heard people who have had some problems also. My general observation here would be, first work on what you can with your consciousness. If you've reached a stage where you cannot, or you don't have the time and your biology is sufficiently aged that it's become rigid, use other means. If you're young, you can do a lot. I've seen people with thick glasses at the age of 10. And this is absolutely unacceptable. Your body is so plastic, you're going to change in the next 10 years to be totally different. You can get rid of everything and cure everything. And I would suggest this with the eyes at least. Up to the age of 45, there's a great plasticity. Around 43, 44 is when it starts hardening. Then it becomes more difficult. Still, I'm giving you my experience today. There are certain states, and if I bring myself into that state and consciously relax the eyes and enter that state, I'm able to see with full clarity and read fine type at this distance. But the bulk of my state, which is 90% of the time, I can't. It's as if I have to use specs. And I've tried using specs. It works. But something in me says, if I can get to that 10% of the time, why can't I get to that impermanence? It's interesting. And it's a certain shift in consciousness, but I have to really work on it and bring the eyes into a certain state of relaxation and habituate them now to be in that state. And then what I found was the reason I was losing it was a certain tension in the mind. And that's when this statement of the mother hit me, like it's a message she gave to the School for Perfect Eyesight, I think. And she says, I have to quote approximately, but she says, when the mind is quiet, the eyes see better. Or when the mind is relaxed, the eyes see better. Something like that, she said. I understood. I experienced that in myself, that I was able to, when I was able to make this correction here, it worked. So again, my response to you would be, observe what's possible for your biology. Play with what's possible. Push it to the limit. If you reach a point where you say, it's not working, biology is too aged, too rigid, and I'm unable to, and I don't think I will be able to, then use whatever intervention is required externally. I have been tempted many times to do that kind of intervention, but I said, if I can have such a massive fluctuation within a short time, that intervention would interfere with the natural flexibility. So I don't want to do that. Aspire asks, when something of the higher descends, does the link also get formed? Like, do you start living in that grade of consciousness which descends? Yes, for a short time. Because it descended, it lifted you into that grade. But that's not your normal grade. And from that grade, you're unable to function normally. The moment you start functioning in your habitual zone, you drop back into your habitual consciousness. That's why you lose it. If you stayed in that long enough, there are parts in you which are not sharing in that and they pull you back. So, yes, you're living in that, but you're not fully living in that. That has not been fully integrated in the whole of you. When that extends all the way to the lower parts and your lower parts equally share in that, it'll be permanent and you'll never lose it again. Okay, so someone is asking if I can share the work about the heart disease. Let's see if I can find out some of that stuff and dig it out. No. So I think we've spent a lot of time. We've nearly 2.5 hours. So we should stop. It's a fascinating topic, and we'll have to go back to our main study now in the next session. Unfortunately, for the next 4 weeks, I will be out of station and we will not have these sessions live, but there will be the recorded talks of the series on the supramental manifestation. At the same time, they will be webcast at this time, and we'll pick up the further exploration of the record of yoga after that, which will be from November 8th onwards. Let's take a moment to review what we read of Sri Aurobindo's work on the transformation of the physical, how close he was to the full physical transformation, the issues raised there, and the insights that we have gained for us relevant to our grade of current evolution, but also a better appreciation of the action that they were doing and the work that they were doing for this transformation. And it's an extraordinary work they did because it has not been done before. And that is a powerful statement. It's not been done in the universe before. Because he says if it had been done, the imprint of it would be present in the universal consciousness. And he said it was not there. This physical transformation by the supramental. Yes, it's been transformed by the mind. It's been transformed by the intuition. It's been transformed by even higher ranges. But the supramental transformation, specifically all the way to the most material, has not been done before. And this was the work that they had initiated and taken to a very advanced stage. And we are all able to reach that advanced stage because that work has been done and is now imprinted in humanity. At the very least, the mind of light is within our reach. And we should all aspire to attain to this as completely or as partially as completely as possible in this very lifetime. Namaste. Terranova has asked, are you doing live in French? Yes, I will be in France. There will be sessions live in France. You can write to email retraite.sr@gmail.com to get details. Or maybe you'll find something on the internet. It's in Grenoble. I've put the email here.